morning. We're going to talk today about, the gospel requires an imaginative reading of Scripture. This is really going to be about how it is that we are to read, and then how it is that we are to fashion an argument and convey it, and sort of what it is that hinders us from doing that very well. I want to start with a couple of things. And this was the book that really first kind of turned me on to the sort of what's at stake here, is this book by T. Gordon David, Why Johnny Can't Preach. And if you haven't read this book, it's quite inexpensive. I think it's about 15 years old now. And basically his thesis is Johnny can't preach because he doesn't know how to read. And he doesn't know how to read because he watches television. And it's very much based on kind of Neil Postman and McLuhan's, whole thing of the medium is the message. And so I want to deal with that at quite some length. And I really want to try to call us to changing our habits and the way that we proceed. So let's start with that a little bit. You've all heard this, of course, from this McLuhan who first said this media ecologist who came up with the medium is the message. So this is, by the way, not at all universally understood. And in fact, the Missouri Synod has these Preach the Word modules on the Synod's website. Are you guys familiar with those at all? A little bit. So there's, I think, 9 of them now, and they have some presenter. He talks about a very narrow topic. Reed Lessing did something on sanctification. Fikinscher did something on preaching without notes. I did something on sacramental preaching. And this guy that I don't know at all, somebody Peebles, he's the pastor of a emergent Missouri Synod church. And that's it, Matthew Peoples. And he has one on using technology in the church for preaching. And he was the pastor of an emergent church in Knoxville that really, made great use of Twitter and Facebook and so forth to spread the gospel and convert people and the like, according to him. And so he goes through this, and he says, with an absolutely straight face in this, he says, with quote, "Technology is neutral." Well, that is just completely false. And nobody who's ever looked at technology in terms of what it does to our brains, the elasticity of our brains, the way our brains are wired, the way that we think, or what sorts of things it's capable of communicating, believes technology is neutral. Matthew Peoples believes it. There are other people that believe it, but only people that have never bothered to study this in any way. I tried to find, what does he base this on? Why do people think this? Or can I find somebody that thinks, that, for example, the internet is good and it just needs to be used rightly and there's no downside? And at least you can't find anything like that if you look at anybody that's doing like serious research in terms of communication or neuroscience or culture. But I did find one book that tried to deal with this theologically, and he wrote a little book called The Social Church, and it was about how to use Facebook and how we can use this. And it was the most asinine, idiotic book I've ever seen. I just couldn't even believe that this thing got published. He was an ELCA pastor, assistant pastor at the largest Lutheran church in the United States, which is some ELCA church somewhere in Illinois. And he started using Facebook and thought it was just the greatest thing ever, and he became this expert on how to use Facebook. But again, he's not actually paying attention to what people that have studied these things know about it. So what do we know about this? We know beyond the shadow of a doubt, right, that these entertainment devices are entertainment devices. When you look at a web page, if you look at a Kindle book on a screen and you read it, the research shows that you will remember about 1/10 of what you would recall if you read it out of an actual book. The reason they think that this is because you're reading it on a screen. And the screen itself is a problem because the medium is the message. And the screen does things to you because you expect that screen to entertain you. Well, people say, okay, well, fine, but maybe I can overcome that. And the hyperlinks, those are useful, right? You can jump right to something else. Wrong. Every time your eyeball sees a hyperlink, you have to make a little micro decision in your brain. And that wears you out, and it destroys your focus and your ability to remember. And footnotes and endnotes just don't do the same sort of thing. So I'm not saying you can't get any information out of it or any knowledge out of it, but we just need to recognize what's happening to us when we read a text on a screen. There's ads on it, there's little flicking things, the light itself. The whole thing is designed, as we know, if you haven't seen the movie The Social Dilemma, right? This whole thing is designed to sell us stuff, right? And to gain information for us to sell to other people. So the research is there's no disputing it, that these things are dangerous. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have any purpose or any use, but they destroy our ability to read is really kind of what happens. So what happens when we go on, when this reading, we do a different sort of reading than we used to do. So we've got the problem that we're distracted, we can't focus, we don't remember. And then the other thing is, we read for information. And this is light reading. We're not reading carefully. We're just looking for the key points or the things that we want to say. And the other thing that goes along with this is that, of course, when you're in the internet world, you are being controlled by Google and Facebook and the other purveyors, right? They know who you are, they know what you like, and they give you what you want. So I had this experience with this poor niece of mine who's very liberal. Her mother and father are very liberal. She went to this big state school, very liberal, and she's a comparative religions and something else horrible major, right? I mean, just almost like the sort of epitome of the most sort of liberal thing you could imagine. She's a very sweet girl, of course. And so I'm sitting there with her at dinner a couple of years ago with, the rest of the family. And so, tell me what you're learning. Tell us about you. And then she starts to explain to me how her program is really great because they teach critical thinking. And her professor is really emphatic that he always shows both sides of everything. Oh, really? Yeah. I said, well, give me an example. And she says, there was this great exercise where he gave us this article to read about whether or not there should be a border wall between Mexico and the United States, an opinion piece. And the argument was made in this very persuasively about what happens if people come over, what sort of people are coming over, what their skills are, what their backgrounds are, whether or not they'll take our jobs, whether they're a threat to this sort of thing, will they be a burden on our healthcare system, all the sort of stuff that you've heard when people have issues about just opening the borders completely. And he gives it to the class, and the class reads it. And then they come in to the class, and he asks them, what do you think of it? Well, some of those fools fell for it, right? They were tricked by the rhetoric of that article, and they believed it. And then the professor explained to them how absolutely evil it was and how wrong and how they had been tricked. See, he showed them both sides of the issue, right? But she thinks that she made, she weighed both sides of the issue. She didn't see anything that the professor, of course, yes, it was at that school. It was at Michigan State. So she didn't see anything that the professor had, of course, manipulated them, right? He completely had an agenda. One side was right, one side was wrong. This was not a balanced thing, but she thinks that she knows how to think critically. I was telling Larry that I think we got to stop using this language of critical thinking, and what we need to talk about is we want to teach and promote analytical thinking. And analytical thinking is related to, it's analog, that it's linear, it's rational, it's logical, and it's objective, which is the sort of thing that you can do when you read words on a page, right? Rather than being fed information. I mean, we're all just sick to death in the last year particularly about people that tell us they have researched such and such of an issue. I know whether or not, whatever it is, I know that masks work or I know masks are fake because I researched it. What did you do? You typed into Google something. Google gave you documents and websites based upon what you already agree with. And then you think you've read stuff. And then you didn't read it. You skimmed it looking for information. That's not research. I've done research. That doesn't count, right? You haven't read widely. You haven't read deeply. You haven't read carefully. You haven't read the original sources. You were looking at screens that reinforce the opinion you already had, right? So screens are just this huge problem that play into our inability to read also the Bible. And to read it deeply and carefully and to recognize what's being done there. And of course, the professionals amongst us, the preachers, we've all got into binds that we created for ourselves and had to write a sermon in very short notice or without enough time to prepare. And we've done that with the Bible. I've done it. I've got to write a sermon on John chapter 3. Boom, I'm going to read this quickly. I got the story. I can make a theological point. Off we go. Right? Okay, there's a time for that. I understand that. But that's not what we want to be doing regularly, and that's not the way we need to read the Scriptures and then teach the Scriptures. So the whole reading thing, I think we've just got to own it. We've been ruined by television is bad enough, and it just gets extrapolated a million times when we get into the internet and these cell phones. There are some things we can do about that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. That's the first reason we can't read, because we've been ruined, right? And it's going to require discipline and sacrifice to get something back to similar to what our fathers were capable of doing. And we got to do it, or it's over, right? Western civilization is over. Too late. Well, we can at least be like the monks in Ireland, trying to save something. And then the thing that goes along with that, of course, is also because we can't read, we can't write very well. And part of the reason we can't write very well is because we're not analytical thinkers. Because of television, we're visual thinkers. Everything is visual based. Camelia Pagilia, if I'm saying that right, who's a really interesting thinker, is Paglia. Paglia. Sorry, I've never heard her name out loud. Camille. She's very articulate, very intelligent, very much not a Christian. So anyway, she says paganism is visual, Christianity is word-based. You know who else says that? God. You shall make no graven images. Why? Because a graven image cannot convey the mystery of the all-encompassing God of mercy who becomes a man, right? It is a word. It's the word that becomes flesh. It's the word that works, right? It's an analytical reality, right? Our God is too big for you to make a statue of him that can contain him or that can even really convey much about him. And so this whole analytical thing really has to come back if we have to learn how to make arguments, right? We have to learn how to preach all over again, not simply at an emotional level, but we need to be able to make arguments that appeal to this sort of thing. And our people are going to have to learn how to listen. So we just had a little bit of a dust up on the blog. I don't know if this was all public or not, but it was just insane to me, actually. So Jason and I did a podcast about how to have a kind of preaching renewal, and some of this was in there, and what we need to do to sort of improve preaching. And then Jason had asked me after it was over. Of course, that whole thing is about what preachers should do. So after it's over, he says, I should have asked you, what should the lay people do? And I wrote a little paragraph. This is what the lay people should do. And then some guy writes on there, there's an onus on the lay people. They need to discipline themselves. They need to be conscious and attentive during the sermon. They need to try to remember it, right, to make an actual concerted effort. Luther says in the Large Catechism, if you don't do this, you're going to hell. He's super harsh under the third commandment on this. It says way more than I would want to say, but I've subscribed to it. So anyway,
So you let him say it.
yeah, I'll let him say it. So this guy, anyway, so I just said, that's all I said. I mean, it was just, look, you support the pastor, encourage him, and, do your work. And this guy says, this is almost a word-for-word quote. He said, no, there's no onus on the hearer. The onus is completely on there's no onus on the hearer to learn how to hear a sermon. The onus is completely on the preacher to make them want to hear. That's pure entertainment ideology, right? That's completely, it's my job to entertain them. Now, how many of you are familiar with the lie of distinctive learning styles, right? I'm a visual learner, I'm a audio. That's all been debunked for over 20 years. The neuroscience, hard psychology does not support that at all. There's no truth in it. But they keep telling it to teachers. It's driven by this. So the research shows the most effective way to actually teach and learn is lectures. It's not the most fun thing to do. It's actually work. So here's another little study, and some of this is from The Shallows by Nick Carr, I think's the name, right? And a lot of you, I hope if you haven't read that, that's really, if you haven't read Postman, what's the name of that book? Musing Ourselves to Death, thank you. If you haven't read that, that ought to be absolutely mandatory reading. To read The Shallows is also very, very worthwhile. He quotes this study, this is just on this visual learning fantasy. So they have a presentation on some little country in Africa. I think, is Mali a country?
Yeah.
Okay, Mali, I think that was it. And so there's a bunch of stuff, facts about Mali. And they have two groups of people that are going to hear this, or see this presentation. Both of them are going to see it on a computer screen. And one of them is going to see a kind of TED Talk level about Mali with graphs and little video clips and music and very, like top production value. And the other group is going to be on a computer screen, and they're just going to see pages of text. And it's the same words. And then at the end of it, right, they walk out of there, and then they say, okay, well, there's a number of questions they ask, One of the questions is, was it a good presentation or a bad presentation? So all of those who heard the TED Talk version, that was a good presentation. All of those, pretty much, all of those who just saw pages, like the worst thing you can do supposedly in PowerPoint, blocks of text, that's all they saw, they all said bad presentation, right? So then they say to them both, did you learn anything about Mali? What do you remember? Those who saw the good presentation don't remember anything. Those who saw the boring one, the bad presentation, they remembered quite a bit. They asked them, do you think Mali's an interesting country? Those who saw the good presentation, nope. Those who saw the boring presentation, yeah, very interesting. Here's the problem. If you asked when you were asked was it good or not, what they heard was I bored or not? Did I have to work at it or not? Learning is work. Hearing sermons is work. It requires effort. The reason lectures are most effective is not because they're entertaining or we're amused through them, right? That's kind of the lesson of that. Were you? I thought you. Yeah. So this whole thing of right, we have to make them want to hear backwards, almost to be beyond. Because it's based upon this whole entertainment, amusing idea where the burden is placed on me to be, of course, students do this to teachers all the time. I've done this to teachers, we've all done this to teachers, right? We're not judging them by the actual effectiveness of what they've done. We're judging them about whether or not we were bored. Well, boring is good for you, most of the time. Things that are good for you are often boring, right? Lifting weights, running, memorizing paradigms, right? Studying to prepare a sermon, coming to a Gottesdienst conference, right? All right, so those are kind of the first two things in terms of, those aren't particularly theological, but they obviously have theological weight behind them. The next kind of problem I see with the reason our preaching isn't as good as it should be is because we don't study our craft. And I've hounded on this, a lot of you have heard me say this. It is shameful to me if you are a professional preacher and you don't read homiletics books. This is, if you were a novel, the other thing you should be reading is sermons, right? But if you were a novelist and you said, I don't read novels, I only write novels, right? And you said, I don't learn about writing process, or I don't learn about how to write well, right? I just do it. That would be insane, but preachers say that. And that's gross. And we need to recognize that this is a craft that takes discipline and effort, and there are things out there, and we need to go after them, right? Aristotle makes this distinction, I think, in the Nicomachean Ethics, between a craftsman and a master, right? Remember that? And the difference is if you just know the technia, right? You just know sort of, I can build a chair. I know how to build a chair, but that's great. You're a craftsman. But the master understands the theory. He understands what a chair is existentially, right? He understands how a chair functions with other things. So that's what we need to do for our craft. And then the final thing that I have, and I'm going to hopefully get to, is I think we're hindered in our ability to read and to write because we are afraid of allegory. And I think there's sort of two causes for this writ large. One of them is we have just misunderstood almost completely Luther's rhetoric and the actual exegesis of the Middle Ages that he was coming out of, which we have kind of a children's version of that we're taught, that we learned somewhere. And then, what was my other point? That we're afraid of allegory because we want to control other people. So here's the thing, is that if we start talking about we're going to allegorize the text, right? We're going to look deeper into the text for a spiritual meaning. The fear here is not, I might say something outrageous or wrong. The fear is, you guys might. The reason we're against allegory is because we're afraid of what other people will do with it. That is not proper motivation, right? And I think we have to kind of take that head on. The other thing that is the reason I'm kind of a proponent of allegory in many ways is because we are allegorizing and we don't know what we're doing, and then we do it, we're more likely to do it poorly. If you've ever preached on the healing of the 10 lepers and somehow related leprosy to sin, you have preached allegorically, but you didn't maybe know you were doing it, right? I mean, that is an allegory. I'll tell you, one guy who never does it in any of my reading, Norman Nagel. Norman Nagel hates allegory. He wrote a very interesting paper that he delivered to the Springfield Seminary in 1972, I think, against allegory. You will not find Norman Nagel's sermon where he'll talk about the leprosy of sin, or he'll talk in those ways. He just despises it. I think he's just wrong to despise it. It's the breadth of the church and the history of the church's preaching, and I'll get to how I think what it should be and the like. Oh, here was the other problem with allegory. We have gotten ourselves defined by higher criticism. What is the question that higher criticism wants to know? The define.
Did it happen?
Yeah. What's real? What's historical? What isn't? Right? Where's cute? What did Jesus actually say? And let's get rid of all this stuff. That's their question. We have let them define us, so that all we're doing is trying to prove it's all true. Right? It happened. And there's a great book on this. This Discerning the Mystery, an essay on the nature of theology by Andrew. How do I say his name? Lout. L-O-U-T-H. He's Eastern Orthodox. This is basically a book that calls us to kind of return to allegory in kind of the most extreme way. So I wouldn't advocate everything in here, but I think his analysis of the kind of scientific method infiltrating literature and theology is spot on. Right? There is a certain sense in which the historical critical method is trying to take scientific principles and use it to read the Bible and to squeeze the meaning out of it. That's what higher criticism is trying to do. And there's a kind of counter response, I think, that sort of wants to take, if we could set up the proper hermeneutical rules and system, we could also squeeze out the meaning of the text. And it's not really a literary way of reading. And the other thing that, I didn't bring this book down here, the other thing that I think we sometimes gets in our way is that we're trying to protect the Bible. So I have often said the thing that David Scare did for me as a student, I think more than anything else, was that when I came to seminary, I didn't really, for example, when I came to seminary, I didn't really believe in baptismal regeneration. Now I knew we did it, I knew I was supposed to believe in it, and I would, but I was in my heart, I was sort of afraid that my Baptist friends were more biblical than I was. And I was kind of like, yeah, we do this, yeah, here's the passages, but, I was kind of nervous about that. And the thing that Scare did for me was that Scare was so fearless, and he just proved to me that Lutheranism doesn't need me to defend it. And if it does, it's in big trouble, and I ought to get rid of it, right? It was like, let's let the scriptures speak, let's be honest, let's not try to protect theological terms and stuff from the Bible, or figure out how to explain it away. And to me, that was just kind of eye-opening that I didn't have to protect it. So I think that we have to read the Bible as actual literature, right? That's meant to communicate in the way that literature communicates, rather than seeing it something that we have to protect. So one of the things that we have a lot of trouble with is normal conversational things that we would have no difficulty discerning in real life, but when it comes to the Bible, we kind of lose our minds, and all of a sudden it's this strange thing. Fritz brought up the Garden of Gethsemane, and I think this is a great place that what Jesus is doing here is it's really a bit of indirect speech. He does not mean what he says literally in the sense, the literal meaning of that is not actually what the words say. Jesus is not actually asking the Father to relieve him of the cross. What he's actually asking for is for his Father to comfort him. It's like when your wife asks you, do you love me? Right? She already knows it, but she wants to hear it. When Jesus does this, he is feeling this full angst and threat of the thing, but he's asking the Father to be with him through this and to raise him on Sunday. Look, this is what we do when we pray, lead us not into temptation. We know, I love Luther's answer, God tempts no one. We're not asking God to not lead us into temptation. We don't expect him to lead us into temptation. We know that he won't. What we mean by that is, we know we're going to be tested. And we don't want to go alone. And we know it's dangerous. And we need you to be with us, right? Although we are attacked by these things, we pray that we may finally be delivered from that, right? I think Luther gets this without knowing this. This is a kind of bit of indirect speech, right? Where, you could probably, it happens in daily conversations all the time. If I say, are you going to eat that? Usually it means you shouldn't eat that, right? It's not a request for information, or I want it. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and this kind of thing is in the Bible as well. And so, like when we're looking at the penitential Psalms and how can these be Christological, some of this is a son's conversation with his father where we're reading it sort of too woodenly, right? And we don't recognize kind of normal conversational hyperbole and figures of speech that we use because we're completely fluent in this without even recognizing it, right? Yes?
So you're saying we miss the real humanity, the real incarnational aspect of the Word of God.
Yeah, we miss that it's real. These are real conversations, right? Jesus isn't going to the Garden of Gethsemane, like Fritz was saying, or Carl was saying, right? This isn't like a setup, where Jesus is going to the Garden of Gethsemane to give us a little object lesson. Sure, he's an example for us, but he's going there actually to pray, to talk to his Father, right? And it's a father's. This is the other thing with the Psalms and the laments and the like in the Psalms, is that the children have the right within the family to complain, right? Your children behave better in other people's houses because they don't have intimacy and they don't have the trust and the confidence that they do with you. Now, I know that because we're sinners, we abuse that within our own families, but the children of Israel can come to God without fear that he's going to destroy them if they engage in some of this, because they have that familiar relationship. And certainly the son has this with the father, and there's a kind of wrestling, right? And there's a kind of, and I mean, so I know this makes everybody nervous, but I'm telling you, you got to get over it. There is kind of subtext. There are sort of things between the lines and the like. So the books that are really helpful, I think, for this, again, non-Christian stuff, but Deborah Tannen is a linguist who's popularized a lot of linguistic theory and stuff. She's written a host of books about conversational stuff and gender stuff. Like, it's so funny, it's a blast to read. So she'll have this like conversation between like four-year-old boys that are playing, and then she records the conversation, and then she kind of explains it, and then 3-4-year-old girls that are playing, and then what they do, and it's a riot. So because the boys, it's all about kind of this bravado and this competition. So the first boy says, "I can throw this ball over the house," and then the next boy says, "I can throw it over the moon," and then of course what's the third one say? "I can throw it to infinity." It always goes to infinity, right? And so Deborah Tannen kind of shows, like, so sort of from her worldview, it's sort of like girls hear that and they get mad because the boys are being mean to one another. And so Deborah's like, no, this is actually the way they're bonding, and there's other stuff going on here. And then the girl play is a little bit different. And everybody has to be included, right? They don't exclude anybody, but they sometimes, I'm the mom, you're the dad, you're the maid. I don't know what they do, I can't remember, but there's different sorts of stuff. So her kind of analysis, how to analyze a conversation and how to analyze speech, I think really opens up a lot of things, like particularly in the Psalter, because the Psalter, those are prayers, those are actually conversations. It's very useful to sort of see these things going on. The other thing, yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's all right.
The title of her book, do you know it?
She's got a bunch of them. He said, she said.
The argument culture.
The argument culture. That's a little bit different one, but yeah, they're all kind of the same. You know how these guys are, these people are. They know one thing, they keep writing books about it. So the other thing that goes, oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. Well, doesn't matter if I miss it.
You were talking about how she opens up a lot of things for preaching.
She does open up a lot. Oh, yeah. So the other thing that we get into is particularly with the Psalter is where it's most exaggerated. But ancient literature is different than modern literature partly because paper was expensive, and because in many ways, they didn't have the printing press to be able to produce these things. So they crammed a lot of stuff in, and they left a lot of stuff unsaid. So in the Psalter, for example, you have the person that's speaking change, and there's no clue to that except the words themselves, right? So I said to the Lord, my God, right? You've got all these things, so you have to actually pay really close attention to the words. The words themselves are the context. There's no, God said, comma, quote, blah blah blah, period. David said, right? You have to actually just tell, well, God couldn't say this, David wouldn't say that. You have to really work harder when you read these sorts of texts. And that's actually very fruitful, because when you work harder, you actually will see deeper. But there's those sorts of things that go on in these, particularly in that, but also in the Old Testament, and even in the Gospels. John really likes to give long, kind of elaborate stories. But even there's things that you just have to fill in. And there is this, you are expected as the reader to do more work than we sort of ask of modern readers of novels, right? If you read a modern novel, there's just so much is told you. right? He looked at her and smirked and said, right? I mean, all of that kind of stuff to tell you what's going on. And you don't have that. So you come to the example I always use is Zechariah, right? That, wait a minute. Simeon, golly, I can't get all my names mixed up. Simeon, right, comes to the temple, and we know that, he's been waiting for the consolation of Israel, and here comes Jesus. The Spirit brings him there. He recognizes him. He confesses. That's all we're really told. Well, we're not told anything about how old Simeon is. We're not told how. It could have been. Simeon could be, 25 years old. He's going out taking the garbage out that morning. The Spirit says, "Hey, you're going to see the Messiah before you die. Let's go." Right? Takes him right there, and then it could right. Well, no, come on. There is an expectation in this story that he's been waiting, right? Because he's the personification of Israel as the Old Testament and this sort of thing. Now, I wouldn't be absolutely dogmatic about that, but I think if you miss this, right, that's kind of an easy one we all agree on. But the Missouri Synod preacher has a bad habit of focusing on these. I kind of think this is a St. Louis problem, by the way. Focusing on these like details that just sort of, it's like one-upsmanship if Bible trivia in the sermon to show that people don't know as much as they think they did. Yeah? How many of you think there were camels at the Nativity? Doesn't say it in the Bible. That kind of stuff. You think he was born in a cave? Doesn't say it. Okay, look. This is not actually that helpful, and but I mean, there is this kind of.
I didn't get.
No, I missed it.
Clear.
You're the only St. Louis grad here, so you have to. So, but you get the point, right? We need to actually read more deeply and do more work in sort of the reading, and some of this is, we're separated by language, we're separated by our context. And the like. So all of that sort of works into it. All right. I want to, I knew this was going to take too long. This, by the way, this is not in this paper. So some of this is stuff I've learned since I wrote the paper. But it is related. But in terms of the kind of allegory stuff, and the sort of why we're afraid of it, and this whole thing about sensus literalis unus est, I think it's really misunderstood. Here's a great example of a ridiculous, to me, misunderstanding. Here's Raymond Serberg in 1953 writes, "The text of Scripture had but one meaning for Luther, even though in his practical explanations, Luther often paid tribute to the allegorical sense. Thus, in writing to Emser," that's the guy he calls the goat, by the way, "Luther asserted, Scripture shall not have a double meaning, but shall retain the one that accords with the meaning by the words. Again, he said, the Holy Ghost is the most simple author and speaker in heaven or earth. Therefore, his words cannot have more than one, the most simple meaning." In the Christmas Postil for 1522, Luther wrote, "If we concede that Scripture has more than one sense, it loses its fighting force. The abandonment of the allegorical method of exegesis by Luther and the use of the historico-grammatical method," that's Serberg's term, "was an accomplishment whose influence dare not be underestimated. Our entire Lutheran faith requires us to believe there's only one sense of Scripture, the simple, plain meaning and nothing else, according to Serberg." And then, so now listen to this from the Large Catechism, which, we subscribe to. According to its he's talking about the third commandment. Luther says, according to its outward meaning, this commandment does not concern us Christians. It's an entirely external matter, like the other regulations of the Old Testament associated with particular customs, persons, times, and places, for all of which we are now set free through Christ. But to give a Christian interpretation to the simple people of what God requires of us in commandment, note that we do not observe holy days for the sake of intelligent and well-informed Christians, for they have no need of them. We observe them first because our bodies need them. Nature teaches and demands of the common and so forth. So there's an outward meaning for Luther and a Christian meaning. Well, what is Serberg going to do with that? Well, Bullman, who's his accomplice, writes, right? At first glance, it would appear that Luther interprets the third commandment as having a double sense. The one literal and the other Christian. But as Luther's context makes clear, the true and proper sense then and now is that we should sanctify the holy day. Listen, this is a terrible abuse and an insistence. He has a term and he has a definition for it. He's going to make it fit no matter what, even if it's in the Book of Concord, right? So all kind of serious interpreters or readers of Luther have had to deal with this, right? And there have been multiple solutions. Interestingly enough, Karl Fabricius pulled the Yaroslav Pelikan one today. So Pelikan says, if you read the companion volume to the original American's editions, I think it's quite a good book. Some people have complained about it, but they're too smart for me. I can't see really anything. But so he says, what do you do with this? Luther says he's against allegory, and in Genesis in particular, he seems like he's allegorizing. And Pelikan says, no, he's not really, at least not in his own mind. Rather, what Luther sees is the history of the church in these texts. So it's what Karl was saying, you have to see yourself. And of course Luther, we don't know, does this, right? So he sees this as, this isn't the history of Israel or the history of Abraham, this is the history of Christians. And that's the way he sort of sees it. That's not I don't think that's a very thorough or good explanation. Other people come up with other things. I like, even though he's not Lutheran, it's Paul Scott Wilson. This is a book I would recommend. It's called God Sense, S-E-N-S-E, Reading the Bible for Preaching. And he goes through in a little more scholarly way than I had ever heard it before, the fourfold medieval interpretation method. And he basically says, what you think you were taught in seminary is a vast oversimplification, is actually completely unfair to what these exegetes did, and we need to be more honest. And then he advocates, in some sense, a kind of consideration of at least three of these, kind of for each text, not as different meanings, but as a unified meaning. And he deals very thoroughly with Luther and this problem of Luther saying there's only one sense, but it seems like he says there's two. And also Calvin does the same thing. Well, we don't care about Calvin. He pulls this, Nicholas of Lyra has this, which you know, like Luther actually cites Nicholas a lot. Nicholas of Lyra says, there's one meaning of Scripture, two sides, the historical reality and the spiritual reality. So we have, for example, Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. That's a historical fact. It happened exactly that way at that geographic location. Not that much different than Washington crossed the Potomac, right? But different because it's written by the Holy Spirit, and it's signifying much more than just a historical event, right? That these details have been included because we are meant to call to mind the fact that Joshua led the people through dry ground on the Jordan River. Because we're meant to remember that this is the dividing line between the wilderness and the promised land, and so forth. And so it's not allegory in the way that Luther wants to define allegory, but rather it's recognizing that the Bible has spiritual meaning, and in some sense, the historical reality, of course, is essential, but it's not the final point. So there's like, look, it's meaningless without the historical reality. By the way, I think this is largely what Origen would say too, in his what's the name of that book where he talks about Genesis? And I think Origen gets quite a bad rap. Luther is not always fair to everybody, including Aristotle and Thomas and Origen and Jerome and pretty much anybody ever named. Origen too, even though he sees the creation as an allegory, he also insists that it's literal, physical, that it happened in just this way. So anyway, I think we're doing this often, but we're not doing it kind of consciously. Right? We go, hey, we believe in the 6-day creation, 24-hour days, right? but we also recognize that there's an orderly progression, that there's a pattern to creation, right? And that's not because we think there's, sort of multiple meanings of the text. That's a unified meaning, right? So I think a kind of discipline for this and a kind of awareness of this can liberate us from this fear of allegory that I think is based upon some wrong-headed and misunderstandings about what the medieval interpretation method was, and also that was trying to react to higher criticism with kind of a one-note response. You say not everything happened, we say it did, as though that was the only thing that mattered. And there's more going on there. So that's the sort of, in terms of kind of a deeper reading thing, I think that's part of what we have to overcome and deal with. All right, I lost my outline. Okay, so, the other thing then that I think gets in the way of us being able to make a coherent argument in preaching is that, and of course a lot of you have heard me talk about this, we have just abused poor C.F.W. Walther and his Law and Gospel so badly, it's hard to know if we can ever recover. So, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but here's the reality. Walther gave lectures at the very end of his life. In the middle of them, his wife died. He himself is practically on his deathbed to students as they're about to go out. He never sees the manuscript. He never approves it. He dies before it's published, right? These are lectures, heartfelt lectures, by a dying man who's watching these idiot seminary students who tend to be kind of legalistic and zealous and ridiculous, like still autistic, right? So I think we have to take the context of what Walther's doing, right? He wants these guys to go out and preach the gospel, and he's a little bit nervous because of their idiosyncratic reality and their immaturity. And he's talking in that book, I'm convinced, about the overarching reality and character of pastoral care, not about sermon writing. How in the world, and I've asked some people that really think this is a sermon manual, how in the world, because Walther is insistent that you should only preach the gospel until the person repents, and the second he repents, you cannot preach the law anymore, right? He says that repeatedly. And you can't dare preach to the gospel to somebody who hasn't repented. How in the world are you going to do that to a congregation? I don't think he's envisioning you doing it. I think he's talking about one-on-one pastoral care. This is the way you deal with a parishioner, right? This is the way you conduct your ministry. And there's this overarching character of the proper distinction between law and gospel that drives everything that we do. But it's not a sermon outline, right? If we look at Walther's sermons, he obviously did not do that. Luther obviously did not do that. Nobody in the history of the church did that until about 25 years ago when we started. And of course, the split, according to Scott Murray's book in the 70s, is not just about inerrancy, it's also about third use of the law and the proper distinction. Ed Schrader, who was a prophet, Valpo, right? He had for years, I think he died, he had for years, his Thursday theology stuff. Did you guys ever see that? It was all radical law gospel stuff, right? Because if you ask the question, right, can a woman be a pastor? And then if you say, well, that's a law question. Oh, well, what would be the gospel answer? In Christ, there is neither male nor female. That's the gospel answer. That is the gospel, completely, right? And guess where Ed Schrader goes? Right there, right? Well, listen, that is not the right dynamic to be asking here. So this idea that we're going to reduce everything down to this and the gospel is superior and answers every question, or we're legalists or pietists, is insane. And that is what drove, though, why do you think, that's how you get rid of everything you don't like. right? Yeah, the law's against homosexuality, but we're of the gospel. The law's against women preachers, but we're of the gospel, right? The laws mean the gospel's nice. We want to be on the gospel side. That's the right side of history. So this, it's true though. I mean, this is the way, this is the religion of Oprah. It is. It totally is. So I think this has also hurt us. And I know this is mostly a Fort Wayne problem. That makes Cook happy. But here's the deal. Historically, you look at the preaching of the church from the very beginning, and the preaching that's been recorded that was good enough to endure to our modern age is almost without exception interpretation, application. Explication of the Bible text, and then helping people see how this applies to their lives. The proper distinction of law and gospel casts its shadow over all of that, right? But you're not even asking, I thought we shouldn't even really be asking ourselves in a sense, when we come to a text, we shouldn't even be saying, what is the law, what is the gospel? We should be saying, what does this teach? And then teach it. And then teach it with the proper distinction of law and gospel, right? I mean, that's what, you just look at Luther's preaching. That's what he's doing. He's just explaining the text, interpreting the text, helping them to read and to see it, right? And this is where then, to do this well, we need to pick up some rhetorical skills. The other thing that's sort of, so this is the other kind of, the whole television, internet thing, screen, it's ruining us, right? The other thing that has ruined us, and we're all products of this, is progressive education. Contra running might be the only one in here that, I don't know, Pete, you're probably, because the Wisconsin Synod took a little longer to get ruined in this way. Pete might have escaped it too. The rest of us all have a progressive education. And what I mean by that is, well, there's lots of things that's about. But at a sort of ideological level, progressive education is about imparting knowledge, and a classical education was about instilling virtue. So, and a progressive education is about explaining the process, right? So we're gonna teach you the times tables. You know, I'm gonna show you. I've got 4 blocks up here, and I'll say if I had 2 categories of 2, that's 2 times 2, so this is how times tables work, right? And then if you understand the process, you'll never forget what the thing means. A classical education is about, you'll just memorize this sucker by rote, and we don't care if you like it. And then you'll learn to live with it, and eventually you'll understand it. So 2 times 2 is 4. Why? Ask me 10 years from now, right? So live with this facts, live with this reality, and eventually sort of the greater thing. But how do we do catechesis in the church? I mean, catechesis is all about kind of throwing out rote memory, right? Learn the creed, teach the children to say amen before they can understand it, right? They don't know what they're doing. Well, they're involved in it. It's a communal reality. It's a familial reality. So there's more at stake than that. But the whole kind of shift then towards all of these flaky subjects, social studies and history as propaganda and critical thinking that's not really critical thinking, and the image-based and the education-based stuff, right? Postman's got this great thing about Sesame Street. Sesame Street's educational. No, it isn't. Nobody's ever learned a thing by watching Sesame Street, except how to buy boxes of cereal at the grocery store. It's entertainment, right? You can't do this. This is one of the things, like, why did we lose our minds over whether or not we can do church over the internet? This should have been a no-brainer, right? We are not disembodied pixels that can be sent out through the internet. It's not just a matter of you can't receive the Lord's body and blood in this way, though obviously that's central to it. But it's the reality that we are bodies and we're meant to live together and to be together, right? Which has to do with some of the smelliness stuff Carl was talking about. But it also has to do with actually paying attention to one another, looking in one another's eyes, caring for one another, right? Not hiding in our cubicles with our screens, constantly distracted. We started we're still live streaming our services. We started doing it before COVID. And I think it's a wonderful kind of supplement for the shut-ins or the people who are hospitalized that Sunday. But it's in no way meant to be a replacement, right? It's like, okay, you can watch this, you can have some sense of what went on, some connection, right? But the pastor still has to go see you, right? Because you need the ministry of word and sacrament in the body, and you need somebody there kind of physically. I mean, again, could the internet be used for anything good? Sure. But we have to recognize you're playing with fire here. This is like, I think the internet is at least as dangerous as sex and alcohol. There's a right place for those things, but boy, there's lots of ways to get into trouble with those things. And there's things that the internet simply cannot do because of what it is, or what screens cannot do because of what they are. And I think we got to have a whole reset. So I got 5 minutes left. All right, that took a lot longer than I thought. Let me just give you a few ideas. Again, I think this is going to require sacrifice and discipline on our part to change. There's a book by Nicholas Carr called Digital Minimalism. He also wrote Deep Work, and he's written several things like this. Stuff's all good. This Digital Minimalism is a good book. It's worth reading, but you don't even have to read it to already get the idea. The first step, of course, is be aware of how dangerous this is and its limitations and what it's doing to us. He talks a lot, in the Shallows, there's a lot of evidence about the plasticity of the brain. Pete Berg can still learn. So good news, Pete. Your brain never loses its plasticity. That means it can still get ruined by looking at the internet, but it can also grow back the way that it needs to. So there's kind of some good news in this. It's tougher as you get older, but it never goes away. And so there's lots of evidence of that. The first thing is to be aware of the dangers, and then to deny yourself some of the pleasures of this, right? These things are built to be addictive. They're built to sell you stuff or to sell you. They're going to try to keep you on there, and they're very good at it, right? So you have to be aware of the dangers. We need to start talking about this openly. Preachers need to warn their people about this stuff, right? And then we need to sort of take steps to distance ourselves. And whatever, you can take Facebook off your phone, so you can't use your phone to look at. Okay, so you want to see pictures of your grandkids. I get it. But you don't need to check your phone 5 times an hour to see pictures of your grandkids, right? You could say, I'm going to check Facebook 3 times a week, and I'm going to only do it on the PC. I'm going to have this long, complicated password on a Post-it note that I can't possibly remember, so that I can only do it there, and so that there's some friction and some distance between me and it, right? They don't want there to be any friction. My dad was a banker. He complained his whole life, or my whole life, that we could stop credit card fraud with a PIN. All you need is a 4-digit PIN, just like your ATM card. You know why the banks don't want that? It might slow you down, and you might second guess, and you might not spend as much money. They would rather absorb the costs to keep the money flowing. I think that's right. Friction is helpful, right? So this is why email is bad. You need to have actual conversations with your members. And it needs to be, the phone is better than email, but face-to-face is of course ideal. To start prioritizing this, right? So whatever you got to do, you need to cut it out, right? I think we need to distance ourselves from pop culture, or we need to at least limit it. And I know, this is a Gottesdienst thing. We all like to brag about how we like 70s rock music, but man, things have gone wrong, and I think we need to step back. And the pop culture is so wicked, right? And rock music and that sort of stuff it is horrible. And then we need to read. We need to actually fill ourselves with quality stuff. Read good books instead of comic books, right? Read books instead of movies. Right? Movies are screens. They ruin. This is why the kids don't have any imagination, is because of the screens. Because they've been ruined, And so we got to do some of this. We didn't get to everything. In terms of the kind of allegory danger, we need to learn to love systematics again. and Aquinas and Abelard, right? There is a beauty and a goodness and systematics in there's a place for this. We also need, I think, Art just said he was going to maybe come back. I was going to kind of make fun of him because I read the opening paragraphs of his essay in the book, and he goes on about being a specialist. He's like, well, I'm going to talk in this essay a little bit about kind of ceremonies and rubrics, but really my specialty isn't this, and I don't do this. Specialists are killing us. I don't mean to pick on him, but this is, nobody should be a specialist, in my opinion. PhDs are the stupidest degree in the world because the whole idea is to focus on and become an expert in one minuscule, ridiculous, stupid thing, and then refuse to talk about anything that you're not an expert on. Parish pastors cannot do that, right? But this whole kind of change, right? The PhD, as we now know it, is different than the guy that went to Oxford and just had to read out 1,000 books and they'd be able to talk about all of them, right? Those were the doctors, right? So we need to sort of be generalists, right? And one of the things we need to do is we need to love systematics, right? And also with this, I think, and this is another kind of St. Louis problem. You guys, particularly, the St. Louis crowd, they have got this thing about dividing the Bible according to author. This bugs the heck out of me. We need to learn to love harmonies. You should love the Passion Harmony. Trying to play Luke against Mark against John. Who wrote Hebrews? Who knows? I know, St. Paul wrote it. What? Just look, the Holy Spirit wrote it. I mean, this is one of the things, swimming in the Scripture, they make no bones about. This idea is a modern historic critical idea where like you make some argument like, well yeah, but this is Luke we're talking about. Yeah, why is Luke different than John? I mean, you get the point. I know there's a place for that, but in general, we need to embrace the Bible as a single author, a single book, and not be kind of so caught up in the sort of techno details. There are some things about St. Louis guys I like in that regard. It is impressive to me. You guys know things like you know like every chapter of the Gospels, what's in them, and I don't know that. It's too bad you didn't learn. No, anyway. All right. And then along with this too, in terms of reading good books, preachers need to conceive of themselves and define themselves as writers. You need to recognize that you are a writer. You're a public speaker to be sure, but you can't public speak if you can't write. And some of this you need to start developing a greater appreciation of language and beauty in language so that when you're reading, you need to go, that's a good sentence. And why is it that, this is it was the worst, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Why does that work in a way that, some things were good, some things were bad? Doesn't, right? And I mean, to start to kind of appreciate words for words, you need to become a logophile. You need to love literature, and I know I've said it before, but poetry, right? To sort of recognize language as this great gift. Aquinas says, of course, the excellence of man is contemplation, right? As Aristotle would say, reason. I think they're both onto something, right? Of course, logos is the word for reason for Aristotle. Contemplation is certainly connected. I think the excellence of man, the image of God in us, is directly related to language. Only the holy angels and we worship God with words. The Word became flesh, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We speak to God, and He speaks back to us. Dogs, he brought this up, dogs worship God by being dogs. Trees worship God by being trees. Humans worship God by speaking, by praying, by praising, right? That's the big thing in the Psalter, I think. So, well, that was a kind of rush through that, but hopefully made some sense. There is a lot more stuff about imagination and oh yeah, so one thing more. So the imagination thing, which we didn't touch on too much because it would have taken too long, really the point there is we need to engage our imagination at the beginning of the process. When I survey the homiletic stuff, I don't hear anybody talking about that. I don't see anything talking about that in any kind of hermeneutical or exegetical idea. If we talk about imagination, it's about how to find a cute story that will illustrate our point. And I'm saying we need to move the imagination up all the way to the beginning, right? That we need to actually live in this text with real people. We need to fill in the blanks, and we need to engage it. That's kind of my argument for imagination. And I was going to read you, the greatest proof that faith itself is an act of imagination is Hebrews 11. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Right? For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand what we cannot see, what science cannot prove, what we did not experience ourselves. By faith we believe the Word of God, and we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So really, faith itself is an act of imagination.
I'm just a simple parish pastor. I mean, one of the things I really like about the way you think, actually, is that you do some of the things that I do, which is really cool. I mean, Scare does this too. He says things like absolutely. And he just lets it fly out there. Carl does this too, and I really love that. So one of the things that I think might be helpful, especially for younger guys, to explore or even challenge a little bit, is the idea, at this point, I'm going to become hopelessly Waltherian, congregationalist in a bad kind of a way, okay? Like you said, and I'm totally with you on this, but I'm also not with you quite.
Sure.
You said that you can't use this distinction between law and gospel at all. And I'm thinking of catechumens and how it's helpful for them to know the difference between exhortation and comfort. Good things that you're supposed to do and things that you're not doing but that are said to you as proclamation. I love that. I like that section in the Catechetical Helps that talks about the difference between law and gospel. I think there's a place for that. And of course, we don't want to get carried away with it, because I also am in line with what you're saying.
Let me interrupt you. So I think that in catechesis this absolutely makes sense. And I spend a lot of time pounding into our children, right? What is the proper distinction between law and gospel? What is the law? What is the gospel? That they can say all the old Missourian stuff. Because what I was meaning was that shouldn't be a sermon writing technique.
Right.
So I'm not saying we shouldn't teach the proper distinction between law and gospel, nor am I saying that the proper distinction from law and gospel is anything other than the most glorious light and the light. The proper distinction between law and gospel is the overarching reality of how we do theology and how we read the Bible. But I don't think it should be the sermon outline, and I don't think we should come at the text saying what is the law, what is the gospel.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that,
Okay.
but I thought about what you said.
Okay, is that enough? Did I?
That's great.
Okay. So I would say here's another controversial thing. The purpose of the sermon is to teach doctrine. I think for a long time I had the idea that the purpose of the sermon was exactly the same as the absolution. And I don't think that anymore. The purpose of the sermon is to teach doctrine. When the Book of Concord talks about teaching, they're talking about the sermon. There was no Bible class. So the teaching of doctrine has to take place in the midst of the divine service. And that's what preaching does. Bible class, for me, is not about teaching. If you want to teach your people about close communion, you can't do it in Bible class. Not just because they're not all there, but because it's the wrong place for it. If you're going to teach about close communion, you got to do it in the sermon. Bible class is to teach them how to read the Bible.
We've kind of been talking a lot today and even yesterday about how we learn by example, right? So could you give us some examples of who does what you're saying well, so that we can go to them to read what they're doing in terms of reading and teaching and... Does my question make sense?
I think we'd almost, Walter's sermons are phenomenal doctrinal treatises where he teaches, right? Walter doesn't have Bible class either. So I mean, we can find examples of sermons that explicate and apply the text. You could just basically read any sermon that's orthodox, that's more than 25 years old. I mean, if it wasn't good at that, it wouldn't have been preserved. Pretty much. I think that's pretty fair. So in terms of the other stuff, who reads well? Well, again, so I think it's probably in the same place, because we don't have this distinction until recent times between a commentary and a sermon, right? Like, Chrysostom just preaches through Matthew. Now it sort of looks like a commentary to us, but it wasn't a commentary, it was sermons. So probably, to see who's reading the Bible deeply and well, again, is probably to look at those same people. You do have a distinction, of course, with Luther, that he has lectures, like the Genesis lectures, that aren't sermons. But I mean, I would say, for me, the Genesis lectures are Luther at his absolute pinnacle, and his most, in some sense, his most important writing. That I think we can learn more from the Genesis lectures about how to read the Bible than probably anything else Luther wrote. I don't know, what other categories was there? Who writes well? There's there's lots of examples of that. Beautifully written sentences. I mean, Patrick Henry Reardon is a beautiful writer. I'm ashamed I can't think of more. We have a book club here that's doesn't like some of my ideas about what's beautiful writing. I think Angela's Ashes is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, even though it's depressing as all get out. I mean, I don't think that's hard to find. Does that make sense? Roger, we got 1 minute.
Oh, well,
No, go.
maybe off the air. I don't want to talk about long gospel. The imagination idea, and you mentioned just right toward the end of this idea of filling in the gaps, and the example that came to mind is the sermon hymn from this past Sunday, where like the whole latter half is Luther imagining the conversation between father and son, and then from son to us. Where would you go in terms of, if hypothetically a new young pastor had a congregation that might be resistant to that sort of teaching and preaching? Where, I mean, the classic example is, well, not every instance of water in the scriptures is holy baptism. I might kind of tend to think that it might be, but how do you kind of bridge that gap, if you will, in encouraging your people to think and be receptive to that kind of thinking?
I mean, I think you got to in some ways, you just got to dive in, and you just got to raise the bar. I think we've got to hold the laity to a higher standard, and we got to preach over their heads sometimes. If you just preach to the lowest common denominator, they're not going to reach. And I think you just start doing things like, Elijah makes the axe head float. How is that baptismal? And it's baptismal because God didn't choose water arbitrarily, but the essence of water is directly related to what he does in his baptism, right? So I mean, it's not actually that hard. And I think, you just start doing this, and you just start talking in this way. Sorry, Brenda.
Okay.
But I think a lot of times, I think there's a misunderstanding, in my estimation, of people are afraid. They're afraid that they're going to preach over their people's heads. There's a couple of possibilities. They're a lot smarter than you think they are, and you're not as smart as you think you are, so go ahead and try it and see if it happens. And the second thing is, I really do think if you kind of raise the bar, they'll rise up to it. It's like longer sermons. I mean, I think to really do this well, and this has been a hard thing, I think we need to start preaching longer sermons. Not for the sake of being longer, but we need to take the time that it takes to do this. We do actually speak faster than people did 100 years ago, so we can actually get more done in some ways in a shorter time. But, we need to take the time that it takes, and we need to be unapologetic for it. And the people need to be, I think, exhorted and admonished to rise up. Well, if you didn't understand everything in the sermon, ask, I think that really people end up appreciating it. They'll grow into you. It does take some time. Is that, if you get fired, don't blame me. No, just kidding. All right, thank you very much. We have Vespers in about 15 minutes.